This is a roundtable conversation, and I'm just going to start by introducing myself. I'm Kate Wright. I am here wearing a bunch of different hats. So the main hat is as the facilitator of this session. So there are times when I will just be interrupting or helping move us forward. There are times when I will be speaking as the person who stepped in to a project that AERO was running 6 months from the end of that project. So it's been running for about 2 years when I jumped into it. And that's the Montana Food Economy Initiative. Helena, who can't be here in our session today, was the facilitator of that particular project for a while. And then I jumped into that role. And then the other hat that I wear is here in the Gallatin Valley, there's a group of us, and I'll talk about this in a little bit too, that formed a coalition called Open and Local. And so I'll be switching back and forth between those hats. I just want you all to know that and hope it isn't awkward for me or you through the day. Before we get started, I did want to say that our goals for the session are really to ground ourselves first in the history of food system work, regional food systems as it was imagined, at least in recent history, and Bonnie's going to walk us through that. And then we're going to talk a little bit, and this will be brief, we have like 4 or 5 minutes from each of, I think it's 5 different regions who've been doing this work, some of them as a part of what AERO was doing with the Montana Food Economy Initiative, and some of them on their own, just to get a sense of the types of work related to community-based food systems. I'm sure you've all read the description of what this session is about, so I don't need to totally repeat that. And then the last part of what we're going to be doing is really thinking about moving forward and trying to come up with sort of the best top thoughts and insights that we have here in the circle today for AERO as it's moving forward, and take that to a session that's happening at 3:30 this afternoon. If along the way we happen to make some networking connections and insights and thoughts on what we're doing in our home towns or valleys, that is better than anything I can imagine. Because I believe that is foundational to AERO, is really empowering folks to go home and make shit happen, pardon my French. But I wanted, before I hand it over to Bonnie, I just wanted to say that I brought you a tomato. I did. In fact, I brought you 3 tomatoes. I don't know why I brought 3, maybe because there were 3 that were ripe. They have almost all burst. And the reason why I'm doing this is these aren't from Florida. These are from the leggy tomato plants that are still growing in my south-facing windows of my house. And the reason why I'm doing this is because there was a gathering in Arley that AERO pulled together back in 2013, and Neva spoke about tomatoes, and she bought a tomato for 88 cents from the grocery store from Florida. And at that meeting, she was talking about, I think it was called the Western Montana Food and Ag Regional Summit back in March. I don't know if it was snowy then too. But she was talking about how the dominant food system and slavery still persisted within the Florida tomato food system. And so there's some mirroring and some echoing of things that people have been working on for a lot longer than I've been involved in food system work. So I brought these tomatoes to give to you as a handoff and just an acknowledgement that, like, I am just a facilitator. All of us are just pieces in a long chain working towards a more equitable and more sustainable food system. And I could physically hand them to you. We can pass them around. But anyway, so yeah, these are not from Florida. And, you know, I picked them an hour and a half ago, 2 hours ago, and they're already busted. These would not sell.
Where's Vanessa?
Certified ugly.
Certified ugly. Still edible. Anyway, so if you could just give us a little bit of the history of where the Montana Food Economy Initiative came from.
So, there's a lot to the history, and certainly far back in the past of AERO and the original farm clubs that were formed by AERO. I don't even know how many long years ago, but probably a lot of you sitting here know a little bit more about that than I do. But I became involved with AERO probably close to 20 years ago, and about the time that I started doing some work in Missoula specifically. And a lot of the work that was started initially in Missoula was through a community food assessment that happened in 2004 and 5, and was really to look at the current state, both assets and issues in Missoula County around food and farming, and how to really start thinking about how to bring back a local food economy. And at that same time, there were a lot of other things happening, especially in western Montana, around the 93 corridor, basically. And as there were different, kind of what was talked about by Jen last night, there's the Bitterroot Valley, and they were doing their thing, and there was Missoula, and we were doing our thing, and then up north, Whitefish and Kalispell, even through the Mission Valley, people were kind of doing what they do, and really trying to connect and build a local food system. And we decided that it was a sizable enough area, that 93 corridor, that if we came together and really worked on networking across that we could really build and capitalize on each other's accomplishments. And in 2011, Ken Meter was hired to do an economic study. That study came out that fall of 2011 and basically said if people would spend 15% of their food dollar on local food, $66 million would be circulated within our economy in western Montana alone. He also, I know, has done a number of different studies across the state as well. But we kind of, to take that study and really start working on the things that he suggested, we did a summit in Arlene, and 45 people came together, and from every sector of the food system, from the Bitterroot to Whitefish, basically, met in Arlene, spent a weekend, kind of did a World Cafe, and really kind of looked at what goals do we have, how are we going to accomplish those, and I have some little handouts if people would like to see them. But just kind of explain what a regional food network would look like in our area, and then some basic goals. And the goals are the same that we have in our communities, is, increase production, increase knowledge of producers, increase transportation and distribution and value added, and increase marketing, and public outreach, and get a movement started. And so really worked on that. 2 years later, we met again at the same place and kind of said, where are we at now? What have we done? What have we accomplished? What's still missing? And here's the second thing that came out. And tried to really look at what a network would look like. And there's a little diagram here on the back of this. I'll pass this around too. But just really needing an entity, we decided to keep the communication going and to create some capacity around this network. Because if it doesn't have a place to sit, then it kind of doesn't get done. We continue to do the things that we can do in our own communities, but not necessarily in a real connected way. And so out of that, we talked a lot for quite a while about who that entity was going to be, and who had the capacity, who had the ability to really go to those different communities. And actually AERO kind of became the de facto entity, because it is a statewide organization, and because they could work in smaller communities and across kind of those geographic boundaries, if you will. And I think from that, I don't want to go into like really all the goals and everything, but in the past, I would say 3 years, maybe. Would you say that it really has kind of found a home after all these years in AERO? And AERO started, maybe you could describe a little bit more of AERO's picking up from there, but traveling around the whole state, really taking the Western Montana idea and trying to build that around the state by actually going to these communities and talking about what that would look like. And Montana's a big state, and one of the things, I mean, even in the 93 corridor, that's a wide-ranging area, and sometimes hard to make that communication and keep those networking opportunities available. But
So the Montana Food Economy Initiative did land at AERO, and there was work done before I got involved. There was a website that was up, but they received a WSARE grant. It was a 2-year grant to work with 5 different regions across the state. And the reason why they got it was they had asked the question of almost 200 partners, growers, nonprofits, you know, what project would most strengthen Montana's local sustainable agricultural economy? And the answer they got back when they distilled it down was a statewide coordination to grow regional food systems by facilitating planning, networking, and collaboration in regional food systems. So they're like, all right, let's do it. So they wrote a grant, they got it. It was a hugely ambitious grant. People signed on to it, but then it took a year to find out that the money had come in, and the first phone call happened in November 2 years ago, before I was involved. That process took the whole measures tool and was built from that, saying, well, it worked really well in Western Montana. Let's take it to these regions and see what happens. And in that transition of time, 2 of the regions fell out for various reasons that were totally legitimate. One of them already had a process going on, and it was going to be really confusing to try to do a whole measures process on top of trying to, this was the Billings area, on top of they were already working towards creating the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub. And then another region, there was just someone who was a key player who dropped out because he took a job that became a conflict of interest. And so the 3 regions that remained were the Flathead area, the Helena Valley area, and the Highline region. Simultaneous to that going on here in the Gallatin Valley, I had been starting to find all this stuff just totally randomly. I bumbled into Helena, we started talking, and our coalition here in the Gallatin Valley started to figure out what it was trying to do and where it was going. So we, parallel to this longer history of MFEI, which is what Montana Food Economy Initiative shortens to, started converging and partnering. So that's why I ended up in this very multi-hat role that I'm in. So that's sort of an introduction to where it is and what AERO really wanted to do when Helena ended up stepping out to take an MSU extension position. They said, we want this to finish as well as it can. So I took it over just to facilitate, not to be the actor, and to help the regions get as much as they could out of it if there was anything I could do to support, and to help AERO get the learning out of it so it wasn't just dropped when they had a point in time where they were low staff. There was a lot of turnover. So that's where I fit in. And what I want to do now, and we started this session a little bit late, obviously, because our keynote went late and we just wanted to create more of a roundtable setup for this. So now we're going to dive into quick briefs from the different regions, and then come back, and I have a couple of things to facilitate more of a discussion around community food systems. So moving into what is happening, at least in some of the regions, 5 regions around the state. Start first. This is
Todd Ulizio from Two Bear Farm, just outside of Whitefish. And I was part of the Flathead Valley regional team for the Montana Food Economy Initiative. And there were 7 of us. 5 of us were kind of small sustainable farmers, and then 2 others who I'll just group into the role of food advocates, maybe. And so we definitely had a bit of a bias, being predominantly producers. You know, we're extremely busy, especially during the summers, overworked. And so we knew right off the bat that whatever we did, the capacity, we needed to make sure we had the capacity to do whatever we chose to address. We didn't want to come up with 1,000 ideas and then realize there's no way. We don't have any resources, we don't have the time, we don't have the personnel. And so I think we started off really wide. We did the whole tools measure, we looked at the values, we looked at what was important to us as a group. And there's a lot of back and forth. You know, do we want to really cast a big net because we don't know what we don't know? Do we pull in lots of different people? Do we want to stay super focused? I think we're still, even now, kind of trying to find that path. But at the end of the day, when we left off, the Montana Food Economy Initiative was a 2-year planning grant. And so our role at the end of that was to just have a plan. And obviously we all wanted action on day 1. So we had to slow down and say, what's our plan for moving forward with all of this work? It boiled down to really 2 things. The first was just to continue with the networking and connecting the dots, identifying what pieces of the community food system we already had, what pieces were missing, who is best positioned to sort of build relationships and connect each other. And we felt like just as a culture of our group, that's what we wanted to do, but there was no specific action step. It was just like we are all individually committing to kind of helping foster communication. The second thing we came up with was the whole measures was really a values-based initiative. And it became apparent in everything we talked about, which was this, it went beyond local and regional, it was values, right? And how do we get our story as local sustainable farmers is really what differentiates us from other parts of the food system. It comes down to the values that we put into the food growth. So how do we communicate that to our consumers? Because we felt like it's tricky to balance supply and demand. You don't want to build too much demand if you don't have the supply to fill it. You don't want to build up supply if you don't have a way to move the food. So a balanced approach. We did think consumer awareness was a big piece of it. And so we left off with the planning portion with the idea that we were going to continue our group into the future. And when we did that, we basically took that steering group and we turned it into a group called Glacier Feast. FEAST stands for Farmers and Eaters Advocating Sustainability Together. And so we've launched into that now. We're considering trying to get some grant money in order to do an advertising campaign. Something that doesn't just preach to the choir, but something that preaches to the entire valley. We have 120,000 residents. And so whether that is radio advertising or print media, something to have a drumbeat of information going out into the community that really, it doesn't promote one individual farm or producer. It's more talking about the issues of local, regional, the values. We feel like that's our most efficient way, we think, to sort of improve consumer awareness. We have limited capacity, so how do we leverage that to have the biggest effects? And so that's really, I think, where we're at. Glacier Feast is now, we're continuing to meet. We had a farm dinner this summer in order to kind of launch the idea to the general public. Bob Quinn was there as our guest speaker. It was a great success, but I think we're still in the early stages of finding our direction, what other things we want to do, really focusing on that media campaign. And, that's kind of where we're at.
So one of the other sessions that's happening concurrent to this is all about messaging, and the reason why that is happening is because of MFEI, and that is a theme that came up in multiple regions. Ian, there you are.
Yeah.
So, introduce yourself.
Yeah. My name is Ian McLean, Sunflower Bakery. I am from Helena, and we're the Helena Regional Planning Team, and we comprised of about 6 people, mostly producers, but we also had the president of the food bank in Helena, and farmers and ranchers, a few producers, and then myself and my wife. And we started out as, when the grant started, we were producers then, but it's transitioned into just baking. So now we're not technically producers, but still I am in a way producing other people's products. But basically, what we ended up coming up with, we did a series of meetings, winter 2017, 2018. We ended up using the whole measures tool kind of the same way to figure out what our values were that we were most interested in keeping, and what we already had in place in the Helena Valley there, and then we decided to hold a community meeting in August 2018, and we included in that meeting a survey, and it was mainly a stakeholder meeting, so anybody that holds a stake in that local food economy, and then on top of that, a consumer survey, so we were finding out what the consumers were interested in. And basically what we found out from our surveying and from our meetings was that number one, we needed to increase consumer understanding, similar to your campaign, but maybe like a buy local campaign, education-based cooking classes. The East Helena Food Hub was created just about the same time that we started doing this grant, and so but that was mainly arts and culture based, and revolving around food still, but they are looking at right now adding a commercial kitchen in East Helena that serves as a place to educate young and old on cooking, and then as well serves as a commercial kitchen for people to process foods in that region. So, and then as well, public education in schools on the value of local food. Number two, to increase people's access to the food. The real dismal amount of small organic farmers in the valley there. There's a few ranchers doing meats, beef, pork. We have the Milford Colony doing some things. But as far as vegetables go, really almost nothing. And you go to the farmer's market in Helena, it's all, for the most part, coming from Missoula or the Bitterroot. And so, just increasing that access through farmers markets, getting the food into grocery stores, hospitals, and schools. And so, and then as well, offering better support to those existing farms. So increasing access to cold storage was one of the things that we came up against. More local meat processing options for those ranchers, and then developing that commercial kitchen that's more affordable for entrepreneurs, and so that was some of that's already in the works, but not necessarily because of us. But we're also on the board for the East Helena Food Hub. So we're in talks with them and working on that as well. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, is making that number of, increasing that number of farmers in the Helena region to where we can meet that demand and give that access that is needed. So making prime farmland more accessible, addressing the financial burden for startups, anybody who's wanting to get into the business, and getting opportunities for beginning farmers to get education and training in their field. So one of the things that was expressed in the surveys was, everybody pretty much said that they would benefit from additional training in their field. And one of the ways that we felt that we could improve that was by bringing, you might be familiar with CFAC out of Missoula, bringing the Planning for On-Farm Success program that happens in the wintertime, and bringing that back to Helena so that people in that region would not have to travel to other cities one day out of a week for I think 13 weeks to be able to get that educational series. So bringing that back to Helena, and right now we're working with the extension agent in Lewis and Clark County to see if we can move that forward. So that's basically in a nutshell what we have planned.
So I'm going to take 5 minutes now, switching hats, and try to cover 2 regions. Malta could not be here. I spoke to Thane Mackey, who is the field advisor for that region, and he's just like, I'm not traveling for the next month. So it was very different region up there, way lower population, way lower capacity to make things happen. Even when there are people who want to make farm to school happen in their school, there's only so many people, there's turnover. The lay of the land is entirely different, and that informs some of what we'll talk about later about how AERO is thinking about this kind of work. They did not use the whole measures. It didn't make sense at all. It was not a meeting culture kind of, at least, it was really hard to draw people together. I think AERO had in the grant, they had a structure for how this was going to work, and that just did not work in that location. And so I think there's a lot of lessons that came out of that region in terms of ground up and being flexible in terms of how you work with communities. But they did boil down, I mean, it was pretty clear. They knew almost before going through the process, it felt like what some of the next steps needed to be. And I think it will be interesting if AERO has the capacity to go back and keep supporting that region to figure out how to support that. What they boiled down to, one is trying to build some sort of a hub that involves storage, distribution, kitchen, similar to what other areas are doing, but they don't have a lot of stuff that's produced there to work with, because most of it is large-scale ag. People are doing thousands of acres at a time. And so the conversation and the language and how people think about it was a little different too. So there was a learning curve there, I think, for communication. And another piece was to have some sort of a coordinator who could figure out how to get fresh local food up there. I mean, there were some exaggerated numbers of, there's not a grocery store, you've got to drive 400 miles to get to the grocery. It's like, so there's prone to exaggeration of feeling like the people from down in the urban areas don't have a clue what it's like to live on the High Line, and they're right, for the most part. So having some sort of a coordinator who could help figure out what are the grants that are out there. They feel so disconnected from what's happening, and knowing, or even having communication with others who are doing interesting stuff. So I would defer to Todd. I don't know how many of those meetings you got to. Brooke tended to be the one, she was another member of the group who came to the field advisor meetings to hear that directly from Thane. Anyway, so that is what's happening in the High Line, is low capacity, still chugging away, trying to make some of these things happen. I think the marketing piece wasn't as big, but local foods and local kitchens was sort of their motto, the main motto, and nobody disagrees with that. So finding a way to help people value that more when the habit is not that, and there are a lot of commodity programs in the area that have influenced the culture of how people eat up there. Here in the Gallatin Valley, Open and Local, as I said, is a parallel process, and Helena and I chatted a lot, and I had the honor and the luxury of sort of popping into this MFEI process partway through and trying to fathom how the different groups were started and how ours was different. Really what we, I don't want to, this isn't, didn't think about this part of the presentation because I work in it, but we went through like a 2 or 3 year process of really listening and thinking about what do we need to do to collaborate more effectively. There was a real desire. We basically had a big celebration. Over 100 people showed up. And it was cross-sector. And the question was posed, what are the good things that have happened over the last 10 years? And what do people see moving forward? What are the opportunities and challenges? So from that question, people just got all excited. They were all together. It felt really great. We had another gathering that was smaller that fall and said, okay, let's do it. Let's see if we can collaborate and what that would look like. So we spent about 2 years exploring that and really boiled it down to 4 goals. And before I say those, I think one piece of our understanding was there are so many ideas out there, and I think the quote came out of the Flathead area. It's like, it's so easy to, and I'm not going to get it accurate, but there's so many ideas, you can just get weighted down by all the things that need to happen or could happen. And so it's really easy to get stuck either in the system itself, the nuts and bolts of how it operates and what's needed, but then there's also this whole piece of cultural understanding. And do you have a community that understands the food system? And do they know how to engage in it and build it up in a way where it can be balanced as it grows? And what are the linchpins? So what we came to as our goals were just trying to support the strengthening of our community food system and the conservation of open land, just because that was sort of where we came from, and it's a huge issue in this valley because we're growing so quickly. And our goals were increase the economic viability of local food systems, increase community members' understanding of and engagement in the local food economy, building and enhancing relationships across our community, and advocating for the conservation of farmer access to open agricultural land, the conservation of and farmer access to open agricultural land. And this is where, you know, we are a steering committee of 11, and then we have a network of people. Some we communicate with more. There's over 500 on our email list. We are not perfect. We're still evolving in terms of how to operationalize that. It's still completely volunteer at this point. We have an annual celebration, but we're moving towards how do we do this? And I think one of the most valuable pieces some of you were able to participate in last night, which is what are really creative, interesting ways that we can get new people thinking about how food system ties to what they're working on and why it matters and how it cares. So that's the piece of it that I focus on the most. But Mary Stein here at MSU, we have Christina at Reseller Foods, we have a couple producers, JC and Nate, and I could run through that list, or you guys can pick it up on our table in the other room. So that's where we are.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Back to when we all got together, as Bonnie had mentioned, I think we were all busy doing all of our own things in the valley. And what MFEI spurred us, AERO's effort spurred us to do is recognize that there was no unified voice even within our valley that was taking control of guiding this building of the community food system. And I think that was a huge wake-up call for us, because we realized if people who were not informed and in the system, if we weren't guiding the system and creating the messaging and kind of building that narrative, that either it wasn't going to happen or some other entity was going to step in and do it. And they may not do it the way we wanted to, right? Because there's a lot of economic incentive to embrace local, not always the values behind it. And so one thing that did come out of our group was that realization that we needed a unified voice, kind of a vision, a strategy. And I think that was a super important role that AERO, you know, took on was kind of spurring us to action, I think. Because I don't know that we would have gotten there without that.
Which is brilliant. So I'm going to try to hold us from other awesome observations that people probably have, myself included. I'm not sure mine's awesome, but, and let our last two speakers, and I actually have not yet met Brittany.
Yeah.
I was like, is it? Because she's smiling at me so hard. So Brittany, do you want to take it from here? And
Yeah,
just,
sure.
3 to 5 minutes, top line, how you got here. what
Sure.
your priorities.
I am a producer and manager of the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub. We're mostly located out of Yellowstone County, but also have producers in Carbon and Stillwater counties, and then one actually up in Brockton on the Fort Peck Indian Reservation. And we were a group that was incubated by Northern Plains Resource Council, and they have been trying to get a food hub going for probably over a decade, and it's seen a lot of evolution. And I have been involved as one of the 4 founding producers. They had three regenerative ag meat producers who were really invested, and then brought me on as one of a voice for vegetables, although I do raise pork as well. And so then we've now actually incorporated this year. We did a lot of fundraising last couple of years and continue to do it though. Now with this weird tension that like we're for profit, but we're still losing money every month. But so like our fundraising opportunities and what that looks like. And we have grown to 12 farmer member co-op members, and then we have other items like bread bakers who can't actually be a co-op member, but bring a lot to our group. So we're just in this really kind of scary spot where we have opportunities and knowing which direction. We had Northern Plains put together a business plan with some consultants from Canada kind of for us, and now we're so off the rails. Like it was a really nice blueprint, but now when it came down to reality, and I say this with some trepidation, but the consultants largely looked at what Western Montana Growers Co-op did. It was like, look, you guys are like just a few years behind them. Like look at what Western Montana does and you'll get there. That is, Billings is just not Missoula. So we just had some really unique challenges. A lot of what Ian and Todd already mentioned. Like this summer we came up against cold storage. It's just, a huge issue. And then we have some like really big, like archetypal questions right now. We have an opportunity to lease a spot in downtown Billings. And you're like, is this where we're supposed to be? Are we supposed to be on the West End? Should we have a brick and mortar? But we're doing these like crazy pickup locations, and like none of it's very convenient. And the only people we seem to be reaching are already like diehard. They will text me to tell me if they're not ordering because they're on vacation. Like they are already such a part of our community. It's like, how do we get those fringe folks and message like just 15%? And like on the one hand, it feels like all we have to do is like sell some more ground beef, and this should be really attainable. But then on the other hand, we're 6 months in, and our sales are about 1/3 what they need to even just cover our costs, so we're not losing money every month. And so, not to like paint this dire, but it's just, and then it's making all those connections, and we're all, we're all so busy, and I hate when that comes out of my mouth, but we're all just so busy. So yeah, that's the wonderful state of the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub. But we have, coming from nothing, coming from an idea and like 10 years in the making, and we do have customers, we do have sales, and we're building that community, but it's still slow. And so can we survive the slowness?
Thank you. There's
I feel
so
like I should
many
have been more
parallels.
positive.
Well, there's so many things that I didn't say about our region in terms of the nuts and bolts that's behind the scenes that are very similar to that in our valley. So we can get there eventually. I wanted to give Bonnie a few minutes, if you feel comfortable, sort of representing what's happening
In all of Western Montana.
in all of Western Montana in 3 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes.
So Western Montana has been doing this work for 20 years, and we are probably farther along than a lot of the regions across Montana. And part of the reason is there's always been agriculture there, and it's always been local. And we've struggled with, like the broader community as opposed to the people that get it or whatever. When we started CFAC 15 years ago, there were 5 restaurants that even said that they serve local food. Now, everybody does, kind of. So, and it's kind of a hippie cool thing to do, right? To have that on your menu, even if you only have one item once in a while. But one of the things that I think that we've done, I'm trying to skip forward a little bit and say kind of more current and kind of fun things that are happening is there really is a lot more cross-sector kind of things happening now in Missoula and in the surrounding counties, in that we're starting to see like Zero Waste is working on compost. And that's like something that we've not really ever been successful at or had the capacity to work on. There's a climate resiliency plan at the county now that's really working on local food and agricultural issues. And in our new zoning codes that they're updating right now, they actually have agriculture as a zone for the first time ever. And so we've gone through all of these same issues in kind of building the local food system. And I think the tenacity to keep going and to keep networking and to keep communicating across all the different entities. And there's, the MMFEC, the Mission Mountain Food Enterprise Center, and Lake County Community Development, their focus is a lot on cooperatives, and so we're seeing a lot more cooperatives. There's a cooperative brewery now. There's several cooperative CSAs and farm groups, and I think those are helping really to spread that word as well and to make it a lot more mainstream and kind of bring those ideals and values forward. And, there's a plethora of things I could probably say. I don't want to dominate, but we still have the same issues though too, and still have to always be reminding and getting the word out that we need to support our farmers. We need to be buying local whenever we can and expanding that season. And so I'll stop there.
Right. So because we started light, I had a whole section in here that I'm pretty much going to just throw out the window and get us to discussion. One of the questions that I had wanted to have just a Q&A period here for people to have clarifying questions, and I think some of that's going to come out in the dialogue. One of the questions is really a theme that I've heard in all the different regions, which is, people, how do you get where you are? And why is it so hard? And isn't there a recipe? And so on and so forth. But it really is very specific to each community, and where it came from is really different in each community, and there's no right way or wrong way to make a process happen. And I had wanted to, because of the AERO trying to do this work, really think about how did it bubble up in your community and evolve depending on the personalities and what happened, for example, Strike Farm closing here. Like, how did specific disturbances or realities in your community impact the conversation and individuals? And I don't think we have time for that conversation right now, but it's a really important piece of the picture. It ties more to community organizing and really thinking along those lines, and how do you community organize alongside building an actual system for local food. So, maybe that'll come up in our discussion. But before we go into the discussion, I do want everyone to just pause for a second and maybe pass these around. And if anybody doesn't have a pen, grab a pen and just take a minute to think on sort of your top line takeaway or question. What has struck you so far in this conversation? And just put it down on a piece of paper, a phrase, a couple words. Like, what are you thinking right now about community food systems? And I don't want to seed the question too much. If you need something more concrete, I can give it to you. Just let me know.
Can you repeat the question, sorry?
It's basically so far from what the different regions have described is happening in their area. What's your takeaway? What's your insight? What's your question? And I don't want to be too prescriptive, so. So people are still writing, maybe try to get to the end of your thought. And I think we're actually going to make the time to do around the whole room, everybody share what you wrote. Try to do it in 20 to 30 seconds or less. Don't ad-lib beyond it, and then we'll dive into a conversation. See how that works. Does anybody want to start?
I'm happy to start.
Go, Lindsay.
So from AERO, my main question is, I think AERO wants to support grassroots regional efforts. We want to connect the regions to one another and also connect them to statewide resources. Institutions, sanitarians, hospitals, food pantries, Department of Commerce that works on marketing, right? So how do you all want to engage with that process? That's what I'm here listening for and want to move that conversation forward.
Let's just go in a circle.
Okay. Well, when I think about creating local food systems, I really think about who should be at the table, who's not at the table because they've been told that it's not their place, or they don't feel that connection. And how can we welcome those of us who feel like we do have a role and a place at that table? How do we welcome those who don't feel comfortable to be there and engage them? So that's what I think about when I'm...
Yeah, thank you. And I forgot to say, can people just introduce yourself really quickly and where you're from right before you read or say what you've written?
Sure. I'm Taylor, and I'm in the Flathead Valley. I'm with Farm Hands.
I'm Martha Brown in Red Lodge. The takeaway that I felt as I listened to everybody here, it felt very heavy, but the takeaway is this is really hard work, really hard. And then the other two things I wrote underneath that is that we need help, because those who are most invested in making this happen don't have the time to do it. And I don't know who does or how to, but I think that's a real issue. People are trying to get it done, they don't have the time. And so then secondly, I really heard you've got to have a broader base of customers, and maybe that's more specific to my area, just the Yellowstone area, that there is not a local food culture overall in our area. And I think that's a huge issue.
My name is Ian McLean, Sunflower Bakery in Helena. My takeaway is that food system change is equal to the amount of collaboration between parties and the time put forward and the passion that's behind that time. Like, if there is time put in, if there's no passion, you're not going to get anything. But if there's passion but no time, you're also not going to get anything. And there has to be collaboration between parties. And I do agree that if you assume that oh, we're just a few years behind, we'll catch up. That's not necessarily gonna work out. So takeaway.
I'm Robin Kelson from Flathead, and my takeaway from today's conversation is probably through my lens, but so what I heard was more contact, and also I just wrote down a larger megaphone. That's how I translated it.
So I'm Bonnie Buckingham. I don't think I did introduce myself. I'm the director of the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition, or CFAC, in Missoula. And what I've kind of been thinking about actually a lot and wrote down is that we have all these different regions and they have very different needs and they grow very different things, and they there's I guess and they're working within their community as they should. But how can we help strengthen the whole of the Montana food economy, and what connections, where are those points of connection that make sense that AERO or each region could really take on and help build that capacity of the whole, and what do we need to do that?
My name is Deborah and I'm from Bozeman, and I was hearing quite a bit about messaging and also how do make local food systems more competitive, and what is the message that you really want to get out in order to be able to say this is not just a specific culture, but really it is an extensive local food culture that we need to promote. And so I said, how do we get across that actually local food systems are competitive in terms of price, in terms of supply, in terms of diversity, and even in terms of, I don't want to use the word necessarily organic, but clean products. That's the word that we used to use because we couldn't say that they were organic. So anyway, trying to really work on this messaging aspect.
Okay, I'm Jamie Laughlin. I'm with the Montana Organic Association, and I'm also a participant in the Missoula Community Food System through CSA, and then we also have produced a fair amount of food out of our own yard and doing more every year. I will also say that my husband's very much into keeping the yard green and no weeds and everything, and I finally convinced him that we would do an organic yard treatment this year, and it's never been more beautiful. My question is, and this is related to being in Missoula and being part of a CSA that isn't certified organic, and I think in part because of the early success, there are a lot of small farms in Missoula that aren't certified organic, and their response is they don't need to be, but they use organic principles, and unfortunately I do see some of them in media saying that they're organic and they're not certified organic. So my question is, how do we not alienate, or I like Taylor's word better, how do we welcome people into the system for their small steps and towards strengthening an organic, local, and diverse food system?
I'm Max Milton. I live in Helena. I came up with 5 questions. I'm going to read them in reverse order. So, and I wrote them down kind of general, but for my community, Helena, kind of the Helena area, how much food does my community eat? Who really cares in my community about this issue? And on a more specific scale, who would be ideal to get on a steering committee for our area? What's the first action to move this forward to some identified outcome where we want to be in 5 years? how is the solution embedded in the problem? You know, Billings doesn't have a local food culture, so permaculture and biomimicry both talk a lot about the solution is embedded in the problem, so how do you get it down? And for me, it'd be the same thing. How does my community even think about that? And then the capacity. Your capacity is huge.
My name is Amy McNamara, and I am from here in Bozeman, and I work for the Natural Resources Defense Council, a national conservation organization. And one of the questions I have as I listen to you all talk, and it's tied to this question of statewide supports, and what do we offer, how can we consolidate services to support this broad body of work. And I'm curious, as we move more towards cooperatives or hubs or shared agricultural equipment, and other things that are similar, are there legal supports and services to support sort of the tough questions that farmers and individuals have as they think about different models that need to be addressed? There are examples in other places of food clinics at law schools, and I'm curious how we might, if there are these needs, how we might partner with the University of Montana to create a food or agricultural law clinic that supports farmers and other individuals within the system who are trying to address really tough questions, but that's the last thing they have sort of the funding for is those types of supports.
Todd again. My question is, how do we build and maintain momentum, especially in the face of overtime, people coming and going, staff turnover, funding coming and going, right? Is it a roller coaster? How do you keep that improving trajectory? And are there tools or formats or structures that help or hinder this? And if so, how do we get this information? How do we communicate this information to those who need it?
I passed all of the pens and all the papers, so I didn't write anything down. And I've had a gazillion thoughts, but the one that I keep coming back to is the elephant in the room, that one form of agriculture is subsidized massively by taxpayers, and local, sustainable, moving systems incrementally towards more healthfully grown food, thinking about the triple bottom line, that is not subsidized at all. So how can you have a level playing field in terms of your pricing? And then on the other side of it, therefore, especially in a place like Bozeman, the perception of, oh, local food is for rich people who have disposable income, which is so far from equity and how it should be. So really bringing, and that is one of the questions behind Open and Local, is how do you bring these different disparate realities together and help people see them and address them incrementally? Because there's no way you can flip a system instantly, but we can move, nudge, transition, build another one. Anyway, so that's, that elephant in the room is what was on my mind.
My name's Kimberly. I don't really feel qualified to say anything in this group.
You're one of the eaters.
I'm one of the eaters. We are eaters. I'm a mother with many children and many eaters, and we work cooperatively farming in the Big Timber area with friends, and I'm trying to teach my children about how to grow things and care for things and take responsibility. And I see the challenge in education, where I know I grew up thinking you just go to the store and buy things and you always look for the cheapest thing. And so to change, I know the mental torquing that I went through to change my way of thinking in regard to food. And so I see the education being an important part. going on.
I'm Micah Hughes husband. I'm also living in Timber. I think the thing that's hitting me the most is kind of like what you were saying. It's such an overwhelming challenge. You know, you have this food system in place that's been here for 100-something years, and we're trying to overcome that. So it almost seems a little overwhelming. And really, the bottom line is a lot of the economic stresses and strains, supply and demand, and keeping the bottom line in the black and those kind of things. It does seem, I guess that's my takeaway, it seems a little bit overwhelming. But I do appreciate the steps that are being taken. I think that's what has been a takeaway for me, is that there are concrete steps that in the different regions in Montana where people are really trying to make a difference. I appreciate that.
I'm Michael Glenn from the Flathead, and I went on the tour yesterday to the different food centers, and I was impressed at the Livingston Food Center by Michael McCormick's talk in terms of, he said there's really no such thing as cheap food, and I guess I would agree with that, because, I mean, like Spurlock did that movie about eating at McDonald's for a month, and it almost killed him. You know, his doctor was trying to get him to stop the film halfway through because his health was declining so rapidly, and you know, and that's the subsidized food. You know, so it's like you pay one way or the other. You either pay at the hospital or you pay for good quality food that's not full of all the crap. So I'm a firm believer in voting with my dollars, and so it's really difficult when I go to the gas pump and it's like the gas without the ethanol is like $1 a gallon more. It's like you know, those are tough decisions. But so I guess my question that I wrote down is, in the Flathead is food storage and preservation and processing, like minimal processing, something that would be really a valued thing and a needed thing, and possibly something similar to what's going on in Livingston. I like he has like 3 points that he approached this with. One is healthcare, because people that patronize that facility, he said 40% have diabetes. There's a lot of people that have high blood pressure. A lot of people are dealing with health issues. And also economic development, providing opportunity and dignity, being able to maintain dignity and it's like offering a leg up. And obviously everybody's coming from a different place in their life, and everybody's at a different stage in life, or you know, different reasons why they would be going there, but it's a necessary place, you know, it's a necessary service for the community, and I really like that model, and I don't, you know, I can see that it's not like a cookie cutter thing. I mean, every community has different needs, and so I guess that's my question. Is if that could be something that would need to be developed.
My name is John Brown. I live north of Billings Ranch, and in community food systems, one of the clarifying questions, I guess, is why? Why are we interested in community food systems, or food systems in general? As producers, as distributors, as you know, consumers, as landowners, as capital suppliers. Why are we engaging or not engaging in community food systems? Because I think that for me, I'm not clear about why everybody is in this room. I'm not clear about why I'm in this room. I want to know that, so it can kind of define the actions I take or don't take. And and that I can then use to communicate with other people who and then all of this in the context of Dr. Salvador's presentation this morning, how impactful, those are the hows of how we are here. But we've accepted those, but we haven't taken on the responsibility of defining why we want to do something either the same and be in this competitive system, or do we want to be in some other form of system that is more collaborative and cooperative, which is where I think I want to go. Part of why is because I want to expand my ability to live and think and believe in the context of a community. Mm-hmm. And not just a group or a mob.
Well, and I think that question is one that starts each community process is what we all hear. We'll probably come back to that in our discussion. So thank you for sharing.
Again, my name is Brittany, and I live outside of Red Lodge in Uther. I wrote down the perceived higher cost and convenience is a barrier to people buying local food, and if local food was ubiquitous and inexpensive, like, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So there's some truth in it, though. What our farmers are asking for is a fair price, and what it's actually costing, especially the state of processing in Montana, and it's still labor intensive, and we don't have this multi-million-dollar automated butchering infrastructure. They're still paying laborers, so it is more expensive. I guess my question is just, maybe that's where the Yellowstone Valley Food Hub at least could use help from organizations like AERO. The education and the messaging and the why is getting that out there to folks when we're just trying to actually do the recruitment. Yeah, we probably use help with that.
And the voice for vegetables is good.
Yes. And by the way, anyone who has not seen met Michael or seen the Livingston Food Resource Center has got to go. He's a personal hero of mine, and he's on a panel later today. And yeah, if you want to walk away from this weekend feeling really energized, go track down Michael.
My name is Sarah, and I'm a student at University of Montana in Missoula. And I also was thinking about the why, a little bit different approach, though. You guys were kind of asking why, and I was sort of asking why not. So I was thinking about, you guys were talking about messaging and how the challenges with that. And this sort of has been answered a little bit, with the keynote and the way that the system has been set up. But my question was, since food is such an integral part of humanity and life in general, why is it so difficult to engage in meaningful and productive ways with the community about local food systems?
My name is Allie. I'm a graduate student here in Sustainable Food Systems. So I am hoping to start growing mushrooms here in Bozeman, the edible kind, not the fun kind. And so some questions that I'm running up against are, what are resources that are available to me being new to producing that I can utilize in starting up a business? And what kind of assessment tools can I do to really figure out what the demand for the product would be?
I have an answer to that after.
Cool.
My name is Henry White. I don't work in food, I work in software, but I'm a food consumer and a cook. My question was, how do you facilitate supply and demand growing in concert? How might we stabilize that growth?
Could you repeat the question, sorry?
Yeah, sure. How do you facilitate supply and demand growing in concert? That's one of the themes that came up, and how might we stabilize that growth, help them grow together?
My name is Tony Hartshorn. I teach soils or dirt here at Montana State University. You need to meet a guy named Chance if you haven't already met him. So I was really struck by Ricardo's use of that iconic Norman Rockwell painting. I don't know if you guys know the name of it. It's Freedom of Want. And I think that's an answer to, one possible answer to your question, John, of why are we here? Maybe we want freedom of want. I'm really struck, question-wise, I'm a statewide resource. I am Montana State University, but we have UM resources, we have MSU Extension, and then we have these conservation districts, we have ag experiment stations. Why aren't the producers in this state asking more of the statewide resource that these chairs are trying to get you to understand that MSU and UM and even the community colleges represent? I'm sitting here wondering when a producer is going to ask me, Tony, hey, I have a question about my dirt, and it might be related to a more sustainable community-based food system. But I'm like the Maytag repair dude. I'm not getting any calls from any producers, right? So what's up with that? Is that a failure on MSU's part? I'm guilty, right? I am MSU, but I'm just sitting here like twiddling my thumbs. I mean, I hear needs, and I have freedom of want needs. Maybe you do. Those pieces are not being connected.
Can I make a comment about that? I think it was CFAC that reached out and was looking to make a mentorship, like rancher to rancher kind of mentorship. And maybe they caught me on a really bad day. But I was like, look, you don't have, like, go find someone who has the knowledge but actually has the time. Because, like, I can't name a single rancher who could, like, do a great job being a mentor. You know, and it just felt, I just felt like such, you know, that it didn't occur to me. But there are people who do this professionally.
We are completely irrelevant, I think, to the future of Montana food systems, and that bugs me.
Yeah.
It can be real.
So, thanks to everyone. Before we just devolve into a fascinating conversation that could go a gazillion different directions, I'm going to bring us back to AERO. Because we could probably spend about 7 hours having a fun conversation. And Lindsay, maybe correct me or add to this. But at this point in time, as AERO thinks about building from this last 2 years of work, learning about working in communities, how can they help support regional food systems, nuts and bolts, communication, specific tools, trainings, the whole gamut. They're thinking about it in terms of communities that have some form of collaborative organizing at some level, like there's some group already working on this, so like Missoula, now up in the Flathead, and those that have nothing. And well, actually, you have something there, there's a hub beginning to form. So there's a group of people starting to think about these questions. And then there are communities that haven't really gotten there yet. So those are the two different buckets of at least how they're approaching it right now, going into it. And then another one is, so that's at that level, what at the statewide level is a universal need? And maybe there's some overlap there. And for our assistant, originally I thought we had a wall in here to put these up on. And I was gonna have one that said with at the top, one that said without, and then one that said statewide. And the idea was, as we have our conversation, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name. Victorian would write down on there as ideas come up in our discussion that are specifically tied to a community that doesn't have something going yet, or a community that does, what kind of support. And for example, in Helena, when Ian and I were chatting, one thing that they have maybe some interested folks, but no one who can be the facilitator and the mover to like get people to come to a meeting and keep the conversation going. Just that small, very important, forgotten role in this process. That might be something for an entity that doesn't quite have a group yet. Could be full. But there's a gazillion other things, and you're not here to listen to me. So what are some of the things Do you want to add anything in terms of the
Yeah.
question before we
I
launch
think
in?
it'd probably just be important for me to share that I came on in essentially August as co-ED, and so my role is with building our programming in this community-based food system space. And so our three primary ideas, and I'll just be really brief right now about how we're going to be moving this programming forward, and understand that this session, I'm here listening, what happened with MFEI, what are the parallel regions doing, what are the needs, so that we can adapt these programming ideas to meet the needs too. Yeah. But I'll just say, this spring we'll be piloting a small group of dietetic interns on a school to farm internship, so farmer-led research and intern projects, so that we're adding value to farms, to farmers, and to local food systems, and that's one way we can grow capacity. Meeting and influence also our educational system. This is a project I've worked on in Minnesota before, and we're going to Montana-ize it and grow some of that capacity. This year with dietetic interns, and then multidisciplinary as we go on. Secondly, we really want to help grassroots groups like this both connect across regions and then also connect to statewide and start thinking at the systems level. How can we elevate your work and bring you the tools, resources, technical assistance, the advisory board to move this work forward? And that comes from a model that I worked on with federal funding with the SNAP-Ed grants. It's called Policy Systems and Environment Work. And that was specifically to do with food security, nutrition education, but that model totally works for the kinds of community-based food systems needs you're all talking about. So I'm hoping to help facilitate that at the regional level and the state level. Thirdly, Robin, help me.
Interns?
Interns.
Oh, the leadership.
Oh, yeah. Iowa State Extension has local food systems leadership training. We want to adapt that training with some funding, with working with farmers to be community-based food systems leaders, so that you come out of a training with a certificate. And I think, Bonnie, you and I probably have to talk about what exists in our state already too. But we want to make sure that folks are advocating for farmers, they're learning from farmers to have facilitation skills. Can you get meetings together? Can you decide and clarify what's the why? Why is this group here? What's the project we want to work on? And then come to AERO where we can connect you with the resources to do that. So the training we're imagining as being accessible to communities, putting all our interns through the training, and then also being one of those real starter steps to the regional projects. So that's where I'm thinking about things right now, and I welcome you to tell me where you want to go.
And I've got to cut in now because we are actually at the end of our session, technically. So for anyone who wants to go ahead. I think I'm going to stay here with Lindsay for another 10 to 15 minutes in case there's additional conversation to be had. And I wish we had more time because there's a lot of great brains in this room.
This will be continued this afternoon though, right? At 3:30?
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. At 3:30, we're going to come back together and talk about moving forward. So the ideas that didn't get written down on those 3 sheets, we'll have another opportunity. I don't know quite how that is being facilitated, but having these thoughts in that session will be very valuable.
Thank you. Other questions?
I think they're all recorded, but if you are not going to keep your sheet for yourself, I will take those. That would be wonderful.
Good job. Yeah.